in the book is really quite a gloomy one, unlike most mainstream business journalism, for instance. Why do you think that difference exists?
Well, I think it's because there is a fundamental difficulty now in recognizing the truth and coming to terms with the truth as far as the establishment is concerned. I mean, capitalism is, an understanding of Marxian economics, and I keep mentioning Marx, but I wouldn't want to give the impression I wholeheartedly support all his views. But I mean, he is quite right in identifying that capitalism is a system which depends on sustained growth in markets, because people invest capital in order to end up with more money than they started at the beginning, and in order to keep the process going, they therefore have to keep reinvesting that. And clearly they can only do that if growth keeps going indefinitely. Now, what happened, I think, after World War II, and I grew up with this, was that people thought, based on the ideas of Lord Keynes, that it was possible to keep markets growing more or less indefinitely and at fairly high levels, and they were much higher after the war than they'd ever historically been, and that's another point worth remembering. But and I think a huge amount of money was invested, and huge loans were made on that basis, and by the time it became apparent in the 1970s that this could not be sustained, and in fact the business cycle was returning, it was just not tolerable to admit that this could come to an end, and that we might in fact be back in a period of boom and bust, where growth could not be sustained, and the growth of markets could not be sustained. And this is also now compounded by the fact, and I mention this in the book, that huge numbers of people, much more than was ever the case before the war, back in the 30s, for example, huge numbers of people have now got their fortunes and their savings tied up in stock market-related investments, such as pension funds. And therefore the consequences of a major bust, a major meltdown of the markets, would be horrendous, both for, shall we say, the hardcore capitalists in the city, but not only for them, for people in productive industries, and for people who are just simply pensioners and savers. So the consequences of this are really, in many respects, too awful to contemplate, and so many people stood to lose so much that they have not been able to face up to this. And I frankly don't think they will be able to until really the thing has gone very far down.
And another point you refer to in your book is what you've termed moral hazard. Can you explain that, please?
Yes. Again, this relates to the, I would say this is a consequence of the post-war economic ethos induced by the economics of Lord Keynes, and I'm not sure whether he's entirely, he deserves all the blame for this. He generally considered the and I think with justice, to be the greatest economist of the 20th century, but he put about this idea, or we associated with him, that it is acceptable, indeed, not just acceptable, but desirable, that the government should intervene in the economy to support investment and encourage the private sector by all means to keep growth going. Now, this has led to a tendency to subsidize capital and to give, for example, tax concessions, cheap loans in order to get corporate sector to invest and to employ people, because the name of the game in terms of the public good has been employment. And what has happened is that has become a kind of drug on which the corporate sector has been hooked. It's sometimes referred to as corporate welfare, whereby they receive benefits from the taxpayer, and yet they are not necessarily committed to delivering, or they're not able to deliver what the taxpayer expects, and it results in people receiving money on the basis that they're going to invest it in profitably and in a way which generates sustainable employment. But in fact, it leads to them accepting the subsidy and accepting the boost to their profits without actually delivering a sustainable or a viable business. I mean, it has been put. I remember reading in the Financial Times. It was put quite simply when in relation to a government loan subsidy scheme which had gone badly wrong, and a lot of it had been wasted in investments which were not really in the public interest at all, but which from private entrepreneurs benefited handsomely and made off with quite large sums of money when there was very little to show for it. It was put in terms of the following proposition, which is heads I win, tails I don't lose. In other words, the taxpayer is effectively underwriting their profits in certain circumstances without accepting any obligation to ensure that this leads to something successful, or if they fail to do so, they don't pay anything back. And I think if I can move on from there to make a very key ideological point from my point of view, which is that it is indeed right and proper that we should expect that the private sector, the corporate sector, should provide what the public needs, which is employment and supplies of goods of proper quality at affordable prices, that they should do that, and that if they expect any protection, that they should pay the price. And in other words, they can't just accept privileges, whether it be government subsidies, or indeed the very basic privilege of limited liability, which has been given to them automatically, more or less, since the Victorian period. They shouldn't be allowed to enjoy these privileges unless they also are accountable to the public, not just to their shareholders. Now, this is a fundamental, and a lot of people would say heretical point, but I think it's one increasingly we're going to have to come to. And in some ways, if I can finally make this final point, it's reflected in the fact that now, with privatized utilities and so forth in the UK and in quite a number of other countries, we expect that there will be a regulator there to determine or to adjudicate over the right level of profits and the proper levels of investment also in some cases, governing private companies. And it seems to me that this kind of principle is going to have to be extended if the private sector is going to have a role at all in the future.
You're listening to Close Up on Livia 103.2 FM. I'm Aidan McKeown, and I'm talking to Harry Shutt, author of The Decline of Capitalism. You referred earlier to you said that we are returning to the business cycle, to the days of boom and bust. From your book, I gather that you would deem what you perceive to be the next upcoming bust as being terminal to the whole phenomenon of capitalism. Why is that, and what do you see emerging from the ashes, so to speak?
Well, before I answer that, your question there, can I say that I obviously would like it in a sense to be terminal, but I mean it's very. Many people will say this has been predicted 1,000 times and has never quite happened. But it seems to me that if you go back to what was supposed to be the post-war dispensation, which, as I say, was that we needed to have full employment, that this was a precondition of social peace and indeed peace between countries, because many people would accept that the devastation caused by the 1930s depression was a major factor, I would say the major factor, behind the causes of World War II. And if we want to avoid that, we must seek to provide